Well, hello again. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today we are going to share Wendigo and cryptids encounter stories. First story. This story was shared by you/Katsadange. My Wendigo encounter. Hi, I need to talk about this somewhere where people will read it. On Thursday, February 17, 2017 at around 1600 to 1700 I believe I spotted a Wendigo in a wooded area behind my residence. I live in an area where Wendigos could and have been spotted, so I don't deny that it was a Wendigo. Anyway, I have found mutilated animals and horrible scenes of death, rot and decay that would make even well-seasoned veterans throw up. The sights have been just horrifying. And this really supports my theory that something is back in those woods. For example, about 1 month ago I found my second dead fox. Its head and spinal cord were about 30 feet downhill from the mangroves mess that once was a body. Its body had its front left leg ripped off and large scratches in its chest and sides. Furthermore, it was disemboweled with its intestinal tract in the trees and bushes. There were also signs of a struggle because fur from another animal and some sort of black liquid were on the ground and under its nails. Now I'm leaving out a lot of details, but those should paint a pretty good picture for you. Now to the juicy part of my experience with this terrible spirit. So let me lay out the land for you. My house is about 100 yards from a small stream that splits the small wooded area in half. And on the far side of the stream from my house there are large trees. So I was out there one day and all of a sudden I felt cold and uncomfortable. Like I was being watched. I also became increasingly paranoid that someone or something was out there with me. So I decided to head in. Plus the sun was setting and dusk would be upon me soon. So I started walking towards my house, which would mean I would have to walk uphill. So I start walking. At first I was waking out of the woods like I was on someone's yard and they had told me to get off, not a fast pace but moving with a purpose, you know. Then I kind of felt like someone was really looking at me. So I turned around and saw a large creature about 80 yards, or less. I'm not really sure as hell how far my house is from that stream, from me standing across the stream. It then proceeded to take a step towards me. And I'm not really too athletic, but I'm not mega weak. I would saw that if I had to run about 20 yards uphill through the woods it might take me 30 to 40 seconds. Yeah, I ran out of those woods in about 10 seconds. It is the most I have ever been scared and the most that adrenaline has ever flowed through me. Now I know what you're wondering, could I have been dehydrated or having hallucinations? Well, I've never hallucinated once in my life and I wasn't dehydrated because about 10 minutes prior to this event I drank an entire bottle of water, and I always make sure I'm hydrated before I go woodland exploring. And there is no way it was a tree because every time I go out there I go to where I spotted it. And there isn't a single tree small enough to remotely look like what I saw. Since then I haven't spotted it, but I hear it. It is believed by Native Americans that Wendigos call out for help like a human in order to lure people toward it. I have heard what sounds like a little girl calling for help out in those woods before. It is still terrifying to talk or think about. Could anyone please help me or tell me that I'm not crazy, because I feel like I am. Please give me all the feedback you can. I'm really terrified of this phenomenon. Thanks. Second story. This story was shared by you/jokes0nme. Wendigo encounter. So I don't really know how to start this, so I'm just gonna spew out some stuff and hope it all makes sense, because it sure as hell doesn't to me. Have any of you even encountered one before? If not, let me tell, these things are not like how Google or any of pictures you find depicts them, at least not right away. Let's get into it. I'm from Canada and I live on a reserve that's about 30 minutes from any town, relatively close compared to other places I've been. Well, it's the end of December and just getting finished with holidays and spending it relatively alone, thanks to COVID. I get a call from one of my friends. He wants to go hunting. Well, that's kind of a problem cause I've never shot a gun or went hunting before. Pretty pathetic for a Native American if you ask me, but anyways he tells me he just needs my eyes and another set of legs to help carry whatever he catches. So I agree, making one of the biggest mistakes I would come to regret. So he picks me up in his crappy old Ford truck he uses for hunting, tells me we are going deep into the bush and we'll find a spot to camp along the way. So we drive about 20 minutes into the woods following what little road is left, and we get to a point where we have to continue on foot. We unload our gear and supplies and carry it till we find a nice clearing with room for everything. After we set up camp, we begin our trek into the woods, going farther than I had gone before. Saw a couple of bucks and rabbits, nothing too spectacular, so we keep looking cause he wants the big daddy buck, and we come to this other clearing much larger than the one we are camping at, and something about this part of the woods just feels off. It had a heavy feeling to, like the air was thick and just had a disorienting aura about this place. But we hadn't caught anything yet and we're getting hungry, so we spot a rabbit in the middle of this clearing. Buddy lines up the shot and bam, we have dinner. So being the one without the gun, I go to get our little dinner in the middle of this clearing, and I notice something odd, that it's a perfect circle, no tree stumps, no sign that any human had made this gigantic circle. I also happen to notice what look like claw marks on the trees surrounding the area. Buddy said it's from bears sharpening their claws and marking territory, but the marks were so deep into the trees it seemed off. Anyways, it's dark out now and we are back at our campsite eating and talking about how crazy this pandemic shit is. I also brought up the clearing we were at and how weird it felt to me. I wanted to know if he felt like that too, or if I was just exaggerating. My anxiety makes me do that sometimes. To which he said, yeah, he noticed the change in the air too and said it made him feel dizzy and worn out, but he also said it just could have been from the long day we had. So on that note, it was time for bed. We both slept in same tent. It's the middle of winter and bundling up can only do so much, plus he was like a brother to me, so not a big deal. It had to be around 1 a.m. when we both woke up to sound of the most horrible scream I'd ever heard. What that fuck was that, was my first though. I'm guessing my friend was thinking the thing as he looked at me with fear on his face. I know, because I was afraid too. So he grabs his gun, loads around, and we just sit there for a while and listen. Now I know my friend is at least safe, he has got a gun, but I have nothing. Fear and my anxiety start getting the better of me, so I ask, where is the hatchet we used to split wood? Out there by the fire, he said. So I tell him I'm gonna open the tent, grab the hatchet, and when I jump in you seal the thing back up. I open the tent and as fast as I can bolt out to grab that hatchet. As I go to turn around with hatchet in hand, I'm quickly greeted by my friend shoving me down by the back of my neck. He put his finger up to his mouth to tell me to be quiet, and we listen. In the distance I can hear the slow sound of crunching snow and a faint high-pitched guttural growl. Now I'm in full panic mode. We don't even have to say anything to each cause we both know our hunting trip was over and it was time to leave. All we had to do was make it to the truck. In the dead of night, it sounded so easy. But it was not, and I knew that from the moment my friend said, I'm gonna fire a warning shot. But before I could even open my mouth to tell him no, it was too late. The shot rang in the distance, and for a moment there was silence. Then we heard it, a scream so soul-piercing it felt like it lasted forever. It definitely echoed much further than this gunshot did. It was petrifying. I'd never heard such a haunting scream before, that I was literally frozen in fear. Then we could hear whatever made this scream was charging right for us, with the sound of crunching snow getting closer and closer. We looked at each other and just ran in the direction of the truck, frantically sprinting, calling out to each other to make sure the other hadn't fallen behind. We're almost there, we kept telling each other as we are weaving through trees, making a beeline to the truck. trying to ignore the sound of this growl that sounds like it's right in my ear, but I can see the truck. We're gonna make it, we're getting out of here. As we come up to the truck, my friend makes it to his side and unlocks both passenger and driver side at the same time. As I open the door, he does too at the same time, and then he's gone in a flash of white. This thing had gotten him, ran at him with such force that when it tackled him it shook the truck side to side. I stood there in shock. I call out to him, but all I can hear are screams and a couple gunshots and then dead silence again. I know in my heart that my friend is dead, and so am I if I don't get the fuck out of here. I go over to the driver's side and find the keys on the ground. He must have let them go when he got tackled. I hop and start the damn thing, whip it around in the direction I need to get out of here. Then I saw it. Skin as white as snow, completely hairless, eyes that had sunken into its head made dark circles around eyes that were just as white as its skin, no nose, teeth so jagged and sharp shined with the color of blood, and its lips looked like they had been chewed off, so all you're staring at is teeth. Its body was so disproportioned, but with long lanky limbs. This thing is blocking me from leaving, but I'm getting out of here no matter what. I floor it with the tires spinning. I shoot forward, and so does it, screaming that blood-curdling scream as it charges at me. Now I'm getting up close and personal as this thing lunges at the truck and bounces of the hood and over top of the truck. As I am speeding away, I glance at the rear view mirror and witness this thing get up and just stand there watching me drive off with its head tilted slightly. I knew I had just escaped death with the price of losing my friend. Third story. This story was shared by u/SilverInkBlot V2. Wendigo. Norma Jean drew a heart on the back of my hand in hoop snake blood. When that fades, she said, tapping the center of her work, you may forget about me. Norma Jean and I dated on and off through high school and then some. We grew up wandering the forest and exploring the caverns surrounding Ripple Creek, running from the hide-behinds and hodags when we stumbled too far into their territory. The backwoods of Minnesota were our playground, from the shores of Loon Lake to the edge of Crazy Dan's property, where the pine trees grew so tall you couldn't see the sky. The day Norma Jean disappeared, I saw a tea kettler scuttling around the shed behind my place. It walked backwards, like they do, and bumped right into the pile of wood I spent all day chopping. Tea kettlers don't ever stray so far from the woods. They're very shy. I had planned to see about trapping it the next day, show Norma Jean. Course, that didn't happen after all. I heard about Norma Jean the next morning, on my way to the general store for a new axe. The axe handle hounds got mine. Bunch of people everywhere, conversing in little groups, tittering like birds. They all stopped talking when they saw me, shuffled away when I drew near. I didn't say anything. Something in their gaze made my voice feel as though it had rusted away. Finn was the one who pulled me aside. Said people hadn't seen hide or hair of Norma Jean in 2 days. Bertie got worried after her car sat out on the road so long and called the cops. They went up to the Janeys, and that's when they found the blood on the floor. Crazy Dan was already mumbling about hide-behinds to anyone who would listen. Not me. Norma Jean and I have been getting away from hide-behinds for years. Everyone's talking, but no one's actually saying anything. Lot of whispering about the Wendigo among the superstitious, more ordinary whispers from the less superstitious. One of the elders is a full-blooded Cree. I overheard a couple ol' biddies asking for talismans. Lots of narrowed eyes my way. I don't know what to say. The cops already interviewed me. I dated Norma Jean, but so did Aaron, Spruce, Hunter, Alder, Flint. Norma Jean was a pretty gal, milk-white skin, sky-blue eyes, corkscrew blonde hair. Any guy'd be lucky to have her on his arm. No one in Ripple Creek has slept easy lately, not with this hanging over our heads. I've had to buy 2 more axes in the last 4 weeks, I keep leaving them outside. The axe handle hounds must love me. I hear them barking the nights I forget to put my axe away, excited to have a free meal. Norma Jean would have laughed at me if she were still here. The thought brings the metallic taste of sorrow to my tongue. I remembered it in a dream, when Norma Jean and I went to Loon Lake Cemetery. There's no road out there anymore, you have to hike through the woods and over swampland that's just as likely to suck you down as it is to let you pass. Norma Jean always had a thing for the supernatural. They say there are 3 witches buried in that graveyard. If you step over one of their graves, they will come for you. 2 of the headstones are near the grove, the 3rd is missing. You really think there's a witch buried here? The weathered tombstones are nearly unreadable in the weak beam of my flashlight. Maybe, Norma Jean rests on her haunches, tracing a finger over a name more than a century gone. Her blonde corkscrew hair is silver under the moon. She turns to me with a crooked smile. Are you afraid? The place did give me the shivers, even in my dream. But I wasn't afraid. No. She smiles a little wider. There are too many teeth in her mouth. Are you sure? I woke up with a pounding heart and a lump in my throat. My mouth tasted like blood, and I can't seem to scrub the feeling away. Mostly I just try to forget the whole thing. Forget I ever dated Norma Jean. It's alright most of the time, I chop and sell wood, and another winter passes. Then I see the hoop snake blood heart on the back of my hand and it all rushes back. The blonde corkscrews. Norma Jean and me. The hide-behinds and hodags. Norma Jean and Flint. The late nights and long hikes. Norma Jean and Alder. The axe-handle hounds, swallowing my axe whole. 4th story. This story was shared by you/AL_365. First snow. A hand reaches down, grabs a handful and throws it into my open mouth. Cold. A crunchy, nearly sticky feeling. A taste like iron. Like blood. The taste of snow is mostly the food residue and slime and bacteria and dead cells on your tongue. I can still see every moment of that day. Play. Rewind. Slow motion. It's all there, a movie, locked in my head for the rest of my life. It snowed today. When I saw the first snowflakes, this morning, sitting in my car, I felt a shiver. Since then the tape keeps playing. Keeps rewinding. Keeps playing. I was 8. Dad threw the snow boots on my bed. Come on. But it's freezing. He laughed with that deep, growling laugh that I miss. There's no reason to be scared. I'm not scared. It's just a forest. Look at all the snow, it will be awesome. We can take the sled. I'm not a baby. He smiled and left. While putting my boots on I called down the hall. But not to the graveyard. A forest of broad leaves. In winter each becomes its own wooden cross. Down the corridor, down the stairs. Dad threw my gloves at me. Then the conifer one. Snow deeper than my ankles. We crunched our way forward on the sidewalk, onwards on the small dent in the snow that usually is a path. A few steps before we reached the trees Dad stopped. He closed his eyes, stretched his arms to the side and breathed the cold air deep into his lungs. He smiled. I brushed my hat back and looked up to the sky. It's not even 3. He opened his eyes, looked up and shrugged. It's winter. Between the evergreens the sky was barely visible. Dark green was dark gray. In the distance gray turned into black. Dad, is it darker over there? You scare easy, don't you? He reached for a handful of snow and I quickly turned around. Hey, I'm not going to throw it. I waited but nothing hit me. I turned slowly to look at him. His right glove was stretched towards me, palm up, with a small heap of white snow. He was chewing something. Taste it. He taught me about the bacteria and the dead cells on your tongue. What you taste, when you eat snow, is yourself. Your own, dying cells. Of course he didn't say it like that. Dad had always liked winter. When I was too small to walk he had pulled my sled. Later he had carried me on his shoulders. Then, someday, I had to walk beside him. It was weird for me to walk through a frozen landscape with no goal or purpose. Just to walk into the forest and back. This is nature. I know. This is real life, not like your TV. Dad. No, really, this is the world we live in. This is what you need to realize. This is what you need to experience. You can't become a real man unless you have felt and smelled and tasted the world around you. Dark gray on lighter gray. Dad, is something over there? It's just the wind and your mind. The dark gray disappeared in the other grays. But there are deer and stuff, right? Are you sure there aren't any wolves? Dad laughed. That laugh again. My stomach tingles just thinking about his deep, full, growling and roaring laughter. He grabbed a handful of snow. I was not prepared for the cold white being crunched all over my face. The cold white. In that light it was just the cold gray. Snow fight. He threw, I threw, he threw more, I ran, he chased me. Throw, chase, until my breath ran out. I hid behind a tree, he threw snowball after snowball against it and a fine dust of snow rained on me. Fast, one-handed snowballs, like a human machine gun. Finally he paused and I rushed around the tree to throw a big, icy hard ball at him. I hit his chest. Only one of his snowballs missed my face. We both laughed. This happiness, he only had it in winter, out there. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply again. This is life. I grabbed snow with both my hands. I'm not a fool. His weight fell on me, pressed my face in the snow. I screamed and he laughed more. Let me go. Not until you become a man. You're killing me. Become a man then. I am a man. I am a man. Let me go. No, eat it. What? His hand held a snowball towards my face, gray as the world around us. Taste it. Why? Someday you'll thank me. I wrestled one of my hands free. Took the snowball. You're crazy, Dad. Took a bite. He rolled off me. Now, that's a man. This is disgusting. He got up. It's just snow. It tastes different from the one before. He grinned. Maybe there's some wolf pee in there. I'm serious. And look, there are some darker spots. My God, you shouldn't listen so much to your mother. He took the remainder of the snowball from my hand and threw it through the trees. I didn't see where it landed. The world was so dark that I didn't see much at all. Dad, it's really dark now. It's not even 4. Let's go home, please. He brushed the snow off his clothes. Fine. We followed our footprints back. The trees stood closer than before. The sky was more gray than black. Somewhere, to the right, again and again a gray moved on top of all the other grays. Dad, there really is something. You can feel when others are nervous. You can see it from the way their eyes narrow slightly. Dad's eyes narrowed. There's nothing. Are you sure this is the way we came? He pointed towards the footprints in the snow. Those are yours. Are you sure we're alone? He looked around, quickly. I too looked, but the gray was thick, suffocating, impenetrable. Shades of gray, in all directions. A line of footprints our only guide. His pace quickened. Yes. I'm really sure. Okay. I didn't mention that there was a moving gray on gray, to our right. I saw his eyes move there. I saw his eyes scan the ground. He took a step to the left, closer to me, then stopped and let me pass. Behind me he broke a stick off a fallen branch that was sticking through the snow. With 2 big steps he caught up. He was to my left. The stick was in his right hand. Let's hurry. I'm really cold. I nodded with my head straight but with my eyes to the right. The dark gray, moving. A shape larger than Dad. I'm scared. He let me pass again and switched to my right side. There's nothing to be scared of. His steps got bigger, so big I had trouble keeping up. His breathing, my breathing, and our feet crunching through the thick snow. And the wind, whispering, brushing through trees and branches. Snow falling. We were walking fast. The snowflakes were gray. His head was turned slightly to the right. The dark gray was still there, behind the trees, keeping pace, getting bigger. For a moment his head turned to me. Let's have some fun. His voice was flat. I walked faster. I just want home. You really don't need to be scared. The world was so dark that the tips of the trees fused with the sky. I hate this forest. Okay, you want to get home. Let's have a race. I didn't answer. I ran. Dad ran. The gray ran. I heard it running. Dad pulled past me. Come on, you can beat me. Even while running he held the stick high. I can't do faster. Yes you can. My legs were hurting. My feet slipping in the snow. I can't. You're a man. You can. A light peeked through the trees. A loud crack of breaking wood from our right. I could run faster, faster even than I could think where to run. Just straight. Just after Dad. Just towards the light. My feet flying through the snow. The air more and more thick with gray snowflakes. Him ahead of me, shouting. Come on. I'm trying. My legs, flying. There was a stick. Or a stone. My left leg didn't land where it should have landed. A scream, mine. Pain in my head. Cold everywhere. The taste of cold snow and warm blood in my mouth. His voice. Get up. Get up. Hands pulling me up. A scream, his. The hands let go. His feet ran past me. There was a bang, cracking wood. A moan that wasn't his. Get up. My hands pressed on the cold ground. Get away. Then he screamed. Again the sound of cracking wood. Heavy thuds on the ground. I pushed myself up on shaking legs, my head towards the light. Run! A loud thud behind me. The popping sound of many small, breaking branches. My legs running. My mind pure panic. His moan behind me. I passed the last tree. White snowflakes flew by my face. Dad! Behind me just gray. Gray sky, fusing with gray trees, fusing with gray nothing. No sound but the wind. A path, light gray fusing into the dark gray of the distance. There the movie ends. Then it rewinds. Then it plays again. The police was called at 5:22 p.m. A snowstorm. When they arrived, not even 20 minutes later, there were no footprints to be seen. When the storm was over, a search party found his right glove. Every year, when the first white falls from the sky, I put on his glove. His hand reaches down, grabs a handful and throws it into my open mouth. Cold. A crunchy, nearly sticky feeling. A taste like iron. Like blood. Fifth story. This story was shared by you/ScreenSuccessful165. It was too large to be human. I have been working as a forest ranger for 12 years. Most co-workers of mine were reported missing, no one knows where they have gone, most believe they were taken by the pale man of local legend. A man said to me, during his encounter, he truly understood what they meant by the devil himself. He stated the thing stood at 3.5 meters, or roughly over 9 feet, its skin was as pale as snow, and was inhumanly slender. While describing him, he appeared to be extremely horrified. The tranquility of the surrounding area was disturbed by him. I then told him that was enough, and left to get a coffee. There was a long queue, so I had to stay there for an hour. Once, the cashier gave me coffee in a Fanta. Do not judge, I checked the time. Shit, I thought. It was already 10 p.m., I quickly ran to the lobby, so I could get to my assigned post. As I was exiting the lobby, I saw my mate from graduate school, Jim. And here's how the conversation went. Me, oi, Jim. Jim, ah, FNG hell, Mr. Wolf. Me, how are you? Jim, good, and you? Me, okay, I guess. Jim, where are you going? Me, post A11. Jim, do you know, it's close to those sightings, just a little FYI. Me, I know, those stories have started to affect my sleep. Jim, don't let those bloody stories get to you. Me, thanks, mate. I will not. I then drove to my assigned post. I was skeptical of the stories at first until it happened. Furthermore, I had climbed to the top of my watchtower, and sat down. I then heard a scream of a man. Help! He screamed. I then climbed down, asked him what had happened, and gave him water. His body was covered in blood, his arm was missing, and there were scratch marks on his back. He had difficulty breathing, and was exhausted. My mate, Jim, then appeared. Jim, come with me. Me, okay. I picked the man up, and ran to Jim. There's a cabin 100 meters from here, we can't use a car, Jim said. We then ran as fast as we could, it was cold, and silent, too silent. We arrived at a gate, there were cabins in this fenced area, so Jim unlocked the gate, and locked said gate. This gated area was huge, there were cabins that went over an entire mountain-sized hill. We climbed the hill and ran down it. We then entered a cabin, we settled down, and gave the man medical attention. He was going to die if we did not act fast. Jim then went to a smartphone on a table with military-like stickers, dialed a number, and here's how the conversation between Jim and a man. Jim Markerson O'Neill speaking, class equals Navajo, type equals W, threat level, 80/100. Man, Roger, MS or MW. Jim, MSL. Man, that's rare. Jim, yeah, agreed. Man, okay, December 13th. That's okay. Jim, yes, send them as fast as possible. I then asked Jim what that was, and Jim explained what was going on. The creature that had attacked the man was a Wendigo, and of Navajo legend. I then told him I know what a Wendigo is. He then said that the people they were sending were regular soldiers who had not fought cryptids. 10 minutes later, multiple military-grade Hummers arrived, and surrounded the gated area. After 5 minutes, I heard gunshots and screams. There's a radio, so we're able to all radio transmissions, there are bodies everywhere. It has already killed over 200 men, have been slaughtered, and the gated area has been broken into by the Wendigo. It tried to trick us by taking the body of a soldier and pressing it into one of the boarded windows. I believe it wants to keep us alive for as long as possible. It has superhuman strength, it is too large to be human, so it could easily destroy the cabin we are in. It has been 2 weeks, people are being killed by the second, and we are going to run out of food and water. If you're reading this, please help us. Signing off, Gray Anderson Wolf Jr. Sixth story. Wendigo in Indiana. I can't really say, this is only my experience, it was more like a hand-me-down, sort of passed on to me, if that makes sense, because a very close friend of mine had seen one and was terrified by it. She hates talking about it, however, being a horror enthusiast. Always seeking inspiration for my art, I pressed a little too much. I had possible encounters with ghosts before, and shadow people, but nothing prepared me for the feeling of dread this thing brought about. After I kept asking about it, I started trying to find it. I did research and I think I drew it to me, perhaps simply because it had my attention. It started out with me just thinking it was watching, or if not the Wendigo, it was something. Then maybe I could hear it. I told myself I was obsessed, that it was lack of sleep, just plain going crazy. I mean, I believed my friend's tale to a degree, but how could it be coming after me? It couldn't be contagious. It soon was making noises outside, like, I know this sounds crazy, but it was imitating a cat that was wounded. It was around night time, maybe 10 o'clock. I thought I heard a cat scream, so I flipped the porch light on, stepped out to see if I needed to break up a cat fight. I could only hear one cat, and it sounded like it was maybe in the trees and bushes that line my fence. I love animals, so I had to try and find the cat, but I couldn't see it. That cat whimper got further and further away the closer I got towards the bushes, but I thought maybe it's stuck and exhausted. I made a meow, like an idiot trying to encourage cat to give me its location. And then, I want to say it was a laugh, and I looked in its general direction, and it was like an emaciated shadow what I could see of it. It was no freaking cat. You can say it was a starving person maybe if you really don't want it to be supernatural, but it was freaking tall, almost like a small tree maybe. I pat myself on the back for not screaming. I just backed away slowly into my back door. After that it visited me in my dreams, or maybe it didn't, maybe I was just still obsessed, but it felt like it was controlling my dreams, not me. I think it was just screwing with me. It didn't eat me obviously, so maybe it wasn't a Wendigo. I know in legends they never stop eating. Maybe someone else knows what it could be. Honest, I still want to know what it is. I feel I need to know as much as I can about these cryptids. 7th story. This story was shared by you/donflyaway. Don't whistle when it's dark out. While growing up, my family wasn't fortunate. To put it bluntly, we were quite poor. Because of that, entertaining myself as a kid was frequently a very tedious job, and I had to get creative with it. Most of the time I spent outside, where we had a great big yard and the nearest neighbors were 2 miles down the main road. On cold days, my mother would make me stay inside and I had to resort to the only thing in the house that could entertain a 9-year-old, the family radio. I absolutely loved listening to music on that thing, and I often caught myself whistling along to my favorite tunes while staring out the kitchen window. On one of these occasions, while I was whistling an old Elvis classic, staring out to the cold October afternoon, I remember my mother coming into the kitchen and looking at me with annoyance while she was preparing to go into town. "You know, it's gonna be dark soon, so you better stop your whistling," said my mom while turning down the radio's volume. "What do you mean?" I remember being confused about that since I've never heard my mother say that before. "You really shouldn't whistle when it's dark out," continued my mother, "it's how you call the dead." "The dead?" I asked, confused. "Yes, demons, ghosts, zombies and ghouls, all that is dead will rise and come for you if they hear someone whistling at night." I thought about it for a second, then turned up the volume again. Of course she was making that up, even I was old enough to know that ghosts aren't real. That was what my dad told me when I was scared of my closet, anyway. And besides, she was just saying that to hush me down. I heard my mom making a comment on the loud music, then saying she'll go into town to buy some sugar for tomorrow's coffee. I heard the door close and looked at the clock, 6:35 in the afternoon. One more hour till my dad comes home, I had the house to myself. The gray sky was beginning to turn into a dark void, as the night fell over the horizon. I was still staring out the kitchen window and listening to music, when one of my favorite songs came on. I don't remember which song exactly it was, but boy I was crazy over it. Losing myself in the tune, I began to whistle along while dancing across the kitchen, treating it like a dance floor. My mother's advice popped up in my head for a second but quickly disappeared as the chorus started. When the song ended, I sat down on a chair, breathing heavily in exhaustion from my sick dance moves. As I was filling myself a glass of water from the tap, I quickly glanced out the window, which was now almost completely dark, as only the cloudy sky provided some illumination to the house backyard, which went all the way to the forest. I noticed something in the distance, just barely visible at the start of the forest trees. Looking closely, I managed to see that it was actually 2 shapes, standing next to each other, about 50 meters from the house. They were both human-looking, although it was hard to tell, as they were almost blended with the dark forest background. I decided that maybe my mind was playing tricks on me, and since I needed to pee, I stopped the radio, and went upstairs to the bathroom. When I returned to the kitchen, I looked out the window again, and that's when the adrenaline hit me in the stomach, as I began to back away from the glass. One of the shapes was gone, and the other had moved much closer than when I saw it originally. From the 2 seconds I spent looking at the shape, I had noticed that it was definitely human, or at least humanesque. It was bald, and its eyes were closed, and yet I felt as it was staring right at me. I panicked and quickly ran upstairs. As I was running I heard it tapping on the kitchen window. I went into my room and hid under the covers, trying to make sense of what I saw. I could still barely hear the tapping on the glass from downstairs, and it wasn't stopping, on the contrary, it was getting louder. I had never experienced such fear in my life, and I noticed that I had started crying, but was concentrated on fear and didn't notice until right then. I must have stayed under the covers for 20 minutes, when finally the tapping stopped. I heard an engine outside and immediately sighed with relief. It was my dad, coming back from work. I told him about what I saw and he grabbed his gun and a flashlight to investigate. He found some footsteps at the edge of the forest but nothing close to the house. Since then I refused to be left alone during night time and absolutely never whistled again. And ever since that day I constantly feel that someone is watching me at night, silently, just waiting for me to make the same mistake again. 8th story. This story was shared by you/Dadams 2016. Wendigo Encounter. This will be a bit of a read. I live down in Central Texas. It started with a friend of mine, Luke, needing a ride back to town from Houston. He's like family, so I went and brought him on back. He stays kind of near the Dripping Springs area. Before he was in Houston, he and I had always heard some strange sounds at night on his property, but we always shrugged it off. He's got livestock, so we often protect them from coyotes and other things. Plus we normally shoot guns out there and don't really worry about what's lurking out there. The night I brought him back, we pulled into his long driveway to head to the house, and along the driveway he has this fire pit about 40 feet away from said road. I know these creatures are tall, but hear me out. Down by the pit, from the car, we both noticed two, blue-bordered, massive yellow eyes in my headlight beams staring straight at us. I said, "Luke, what the F do you see that?" as I reached for my flashlight and one of my firearms, ended up grabbing my .22 with hollow points, and I jumped out of my car window to run straight to the gleaming eyes. They seemed to blink once and then vanished into the dark. I ran to where I saw it standing and looked all around, the whole FBI flashlight/handgun stance. Scanning. I hear footsteps approaching from behind. Startling at first, but these steps were from Luke coming up behind me, yelling, "Watch out, watch out." I turn around to him a few feet away. He'd stopped. He looked confused and looks around, then said, "It was just behind you and it was waist high." I think to myself, what's waist high and has night vision? Mountain lions. So that's what I thought for a moment. Still standing in that spot, he says, "We need more gear," so we went to my car. We loaded/geared up. Killed the engine. Then, back into the trees. We approached the tree line, aiming the lights into the trees, about waist high. Then I beam my light upwards and see those same eyes dart in a straight line to our left, further into the trees, away from my car and away from his house. Now we're spooked. How is it 9 to 10 feet up in the air or the trees without making a single noise? No wing flap, no twigs, footsteps. Just dead silence. It's about 2:30 a.m. now. We have been following and going the direction we saw the eyes trail towards, staying very quiet. Suddenly. Y'all. I promise and swear on my life to this day. Out of the thicket, about 8 feet in front of me, I see the eyes open within the darkness of the woods. Massive. Glowing, and a few inches apart, which made me assume that this creature has size on its side. It stared into me, I stared back. I'm facing this unknown creature at this moment and I shakily ask, "Luke, are you seeing this?" Not moving my flashlight and not breaking eye contact, I want to know where this thing is and I want to know if it moves. I don't, dude, what do you see? Luke, are you sure you don't see this? I don't. What is it? I assume the only reason he did not see these eyes is because of my flashlight and my angle with the beam. He was not standing directly in front of the creature, as he was about 6 feet to my right at the moment, so I understand why he couldn't see what I saw due to angle and perspective. After that little back and forth, I see it approach me. It got closer. Hell no. I raised my handgun. I said, "I'm firing," and then fired at this unknown being directly between the eyes. The round I'd just fired stirred up a lot of shit. We heard a very short but low-pitched growl/grunt, followed by what sounded like something very heavy, easily heavier than myself, knocking into a couple of the trees around it. Above, the birds in that tree dispersed, we heard no footsteps, no retreating, and stayed there a few moments longer. Listening. Scanning. We stayed out there waiting to hear or see anything else for about an hour after that, but the night was quiet and calm afterwards. We go inside, call it a weird day and go to bed. Next morning, we went to where we spotted and fired. Then we found a bunch of triangle, shaped footprints that lead to the fence. We look up. There's a break in the top fencing's wires. Right on the other side of the break, a few limbs/branches had been freshly broken off as they lay on the ground. Some remained dangling and facing the forest floor, like where you would land if you were to jump from the wire break at the top. This is all I have on this story, other than the fact that my friend and I to this day still occasionally see those eyes at night, in our dreams and in our windows. Ninth story. This story was shared by you/Lucky12. I had an encounter with a Wendigo in northern Idaho. This was a few years ago and I haven't done much research on it until recently. My family and I had gone up to my grandparents' house. They had 10 acres of land and only used about 1 to 1.5 acres for the house and yard. They had a large, dense, pine forest area all around their house. Except for the road to it, there was forest for miles around. They had cut down some trees to make four-wheeler paths that we could ride on when we went up there. One day my sister and I were riding out on the paths on some of my grandparents' four-wheelers. For whatever reason, I think it was to get a drink but I don't entirely remember, my sister went inside. I thought nothing of it and kept riding the four-wheeler I was on. Well, about 3 minutes later I was driving past a really dense patch of the forest. Over the four-wheeler engine I heard a loud growl. I heard it clearly to my left in the patch of forest. Thinking it was just a coyote, I looked over towards where I heard the growl. I did not see a coyote. You know that feeling when you look into a forest at night and you get scared something will stare back at you? Well, this happened to me in the middle of the day. What I was looking at still haunts me to this day. I was staring into two large, yellow eyes. It appeared that they were sunken into the creature's face. The eyes were probably about 1.75 times the size of a normal human eye, and they were watching me. I could see by looking at the eyes alone that this was a smart creature. I didn't get to see what it was because it was standing in a bush. This bush was very large, like probably about 10 feet tall. About 8 feet up this bush is where I saw these eyes. I couldn't see any other part of this creature, but I didn't stick around to find out what it was. I put the four-wheeler into drive and sped up to about 55 to 60 miles per hour. I ran inside and did not go back out on the paths for the rest of the trip. No one else in my family saw anything, but I was terrified of whatever it was. Fast forward 6 years and it is this year. I was talking with my friend about spooky things we had seen. I told him about this story and began to wonder what I could possibly have seen. I did a lot of research on what large predatory animals live up there. It is northern Idaho if you don't believe me and want to go check. After doing a little bit of digging I found that no animals that were 8 feet tall. I didn't believe it because I was skeptical of anything that was paranormal. I checked again and again because I didn't want to believe it was something that no one had ever captured or been able to prove existed. The largest wolf ever found would have only been 6 feet tall when standing on its hind legs. The largest bear might have been large enough, but it could not have fit in that bush. So I began to research any possible creature that it could have been. Eventually I found one. A Wendigo. It was the only possible creature I could have seen. I don't know why it didn't attack me, or why it let me get away. Based off the features I saw, the large, yellow, sunken eyes, it could have only been a Wendigo. What scared me even more, is that a couple years later my grandparents moved out of that house for an unknown reason. They say it was to be closer to the family, but the family was fine making a long drive, and coming up very often. They moved only a little bit closer. It is still a long drive. 10th story. This story was shared by you/Unathana. Wendigo stories. When I was young, I often spent parts of summers with my grandmother in her home out in the country. It was my favorite place in the world, and I always looked forward to the week-long stays of gardening, baking, late-night fires with s'mores and ghost stories, and enjoying having my grandmother all to myself. There was a pond, not far from her house, where I would sometimes go to swim. It was home to quite a few frogs, and at night they made the most incessant noises. I complained to my grandmother only once, saying I couldn't enjoy the night breeze with all that racket. She took me on her lap and told me a story about an old man and woman who lived near a lake. The old man couldn't stand the singing of the frogs, but his wife told him that they kept the Wendigo away, and to harm them would be unwise. Well, he didn't listen, and set about methodically catching all the frogs on the lake. It was a process that took some time, but he did not stop until he had rid the lake of the pesky amphibians. That night, without the protection of the frogs, he and his wife were slaughtered by the Wendigo, a vicious, whip-like demon creature with elongated fingers ending in razor-sharp talons, and rows of silver teeth as thin and keen as needles. I wrote it off as another of her ghost stories, though she seemed more serious than usual about it. I never complained about the frogs again, mostly because I grew to enjoy them, and put the story out of my mind. In fact, I'd forgotten all about it until it came up this past spring in a Native American literature class I was taking in college. The mention of the Wendigo sparked that old memory of my grandmother's story. I thought she had made up the word. I didn't realize there were stories about it, originating in Algonquian legends. Eager to connect something from my childhood to the topic, I googled it, only to find that my grandmother had apparently been mistaken. There was nothing I could find about the story she had told me, nor any references of frogs providing protection from the Wendigo. In fact, the Wendigo of legends seemed very little like my grandmother's version. They were said to be insatiable, craving human flesh, and sometimes created from the forms of people who had resorted to cannibalism to survive. Descriptions varied, but they sounded almost nothing like my grandmother's bogeyman version. I actually chuckled as I read it, almost a bit embarrassed by how badly my grandmother had messed up the original tale. I changed residences this summer, moving to a newly built, 1,000 square foot, on each side, duplex on the edge of town. The other side is to be occupied by my landlady, who'd had the place built. However, she isn't scheduled to move the rest of her stuff in and begin living there for a couple of weeks. She's waiting for her lease to end. Even though my new place is only a few minutes from the edge of town, it feels much more isolated. I enjoy the seclusion of my new home and its proximity to a more natural setting. I'm surrounded by woods, and from my patio, I can even see a pond beyond the carefully landscaped lawn, which is meticulously carved out from the surrounding woodlands. Just like the pond near my grandmother's house, the frogs have put up a ferocious racket lately. I prefer not to pay to run my air conditioning if I can help it, so I have every window open to catch a breeze. That means that I can hear them as clearly as if I were standing on the water's edge. It took a few days to get used to the noise, but I'm fine now, just like I was those summers when I was young. In fact, the noise has been comforting to me during the stress of the move. Tonight is different. I find myself standing in my living room, staring at where the pond is, though I can't see it in the dark. The air is eerily still, and oppressively warm, but all my windows are shut, and I feel impossibly cold. I'd long since convinced myself that my grandmother's story had been a silly tale, a twisting of an old legend by irreverent storytellers. But for some reason, I have the most overwhelming sense of dread growing in the pit of my stomach. I don't know what to do. I'm trapped. Leaving my house means braving the darkness beyond my home, but I don't know if I'm going to be safe in here either. The frogs have stopped singing. 1. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.